This is my 118th video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my lengthy series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. This part is another kit build of the Airfix Dapol plastic engine shed kit. In this case I'll be using both an Airfix and a Dapol example of the kit, combining them to produce a double-length engine shed, which turned out to be not quite as simple as the instructions would have you believe. I picked up this old Airfix version of the engine shed kit at the first Kitchener train show back on a snowy winter's day. There was a vendor who had a bunch of these old Airfix kits, and I bought 5 off him, I think, for about $7 a piece. I already built the Airfix travelling crane kit that I got that day in part 69. I thought that I could use this kit to make another engine shed for my main Hornby layout, to go on one of the tracks around the turntable. But I realised when I looked at the kit more closely that it made a very small engine shed that wouldn't really be very suitable to go on one of my turntable tracks. However, the instructions did say that 2 kits could be combined to produce a double-length engine shed. There was also an option for combining 2 kits side by side to produce a double-track engine shed, and if you were really ambitious you could combine 4 kits to build a double-length 2-track engine shed, although if you did that you'd end up paying quite a bit more than for the Metcalfe 2-track engine shed, which is also plenty long enough. Anyway, what I was interested in was producing a double-length engine shed, and for that I was going to need another one of these kits. Not surprisingly, I couldn't find one in stock locally here in Canada, and importing one from the UK myself would certainly be possible but pricey. So I decided to just be patient and ordered one from British Model Trains, my local dealer for British things. Of course, the new one that I eventually got from British Model Trains a month or 2 later was made by Dapol, who now make and sell all of these kits. I paid $17 Canadian plus tax for the Dapol example. So now I was ready to build my double-length shed. As is generally the case, the quality of the parts in the Dapol kits was poor, with massive amounts of flash and other casting errors. The moulds are very old now, so it's not surprising that they don't produce crisply cast parts. Even the Airfix version that I bought had a bit of flash here and there. But here's a closer view of the Dapol parts before I unpack them. Definitely going to be a bit of work there, carving the parts out of the flash. Here are the instruction sheets from the 2 versions. Dapol did completely rewrite the instructions and drew their own diagrams. On balance, I guess the Dapol instructions are slightly better, covering some details more clearly. However, both sets of instructions were severely lacking in terms of fully addressing how to combine 2 kits to make a double-length shed. I can't really speak about the double-track combination as I didn't attempt that. Here are all of the parts from the Airfix kit. Generally these were pretty well cast with only a little flash. It's not a very complicated kit, although additional complications do rear their heads when combining for a double-length shed. For a double-length shed I wasn't going to need all of the parts from the Dapol kit. I used the Airfix parts for preference, where I had 2 and only needed 1, as the Airfix parts were better made. Here are the basic parts I was going to have to use from the Dapol kit: walls, roofs, including roof louvers, and windows. Here are those parts some time later, after separating from the sprues and cleaning up. It was pretty self-evident what most of the parts were, but I wondered about the 2 long things shown at centre right here. Examining the instructions, it turned out that these were pieces to allow you to join 2 front walls and 2 back walls together when making a double-track shed. So I had these from each kit, but I wasn't going to need them. I started by joining two sidewalls together to make a double-length sidewall. Both sets of instructions basically just said to join two sidewalls together without elaborating on details, but there were actually issues and some modification of the parts was going to be inevitable to properly produce a double-length shed. Here I've made both of my double-length sidewalls. The problem is that the sidewalls are not equivalent at each end. Each sidewall is made with a flat end, which is designed to butt up against the rear wall, and a beveled end with the bottom slightly protruding, which is designed to join on a bevel to the front wall. Now, the only way that you can readily glue two sidewalls together is to glue the back end of one wall to the back end of the other, since only the back ends are flat, and that is what is shown here. But when you do that, you end up with front ends at both ends of your joined-up long wall, and the front ends won't connect properly to the back wall. As you can see here, the back wall is designed to have the flat end of a side wall butted up against it, whereas the front end that you now have is beveled and protrudes at the bottom. So to join your long side wall to the back wall, you're going to have to sand down the back end to make it flat. It could have been done the other way round, sanding down one front end first to make it flat and then gluing that to the back of another side wall to make your long wall. But either way, one end on each side has to be modified to make things go together properly. As you'll see later, similar modifications will be required for the roof parts. None of this is mentioned at all in the instructions. Once I sanded down one end of my sidewall, I glued it first to the Airfix front wall, where the bevel fits neatly. Here are those three sections glued together, the two sidewall sections and the front wall. You can see on the left of the front wall here how the bevel of the sidewall is supposed to fit to that. I glued my other double wall to the front after sanding its other end flat. So now I'd got three sides of my double-length shed in place. Then I glued on the back wall, butting the sanded ends of my side wall up against it. Rather than trying to glue both corners at the same time, I just glued one first. Then I applied glue to the final corner that wasn't fixed, and glued it with my sanded side wall end butted up to the edge of the back wall. I now had all four walls made up, although the long side walls were tending to warp. There's a central roof truss part that is only used when making a double-length shed. I glued this in place at the middle of my side walls, which helped to take the worst of the warping out. Next, I wanted to get the roof louvers in place. These are tricky parts to work with, as they're long and thin and so tend to warp very badly. I had to fiddle around a lot bending them to get them to even approximate to being straight. The back wall sits up above the level of the side walls. I worried about this at first, but the instructions make it clear that this is deliberate. The roof parts are intended to butt up against the back wall, whereas they'll go over the top of the front wall. The long bars seen here are for the roof parts to rest on. The hole and the peg are for fittings on the end of the louver parts to fit into. This is the top of the front wall. At this end, the louver parts are intended to sit against those ledges, with no fittings on this end of the louver parts. The round hole with the legs behind it is for the fan. I did my best to glue the louver parts together, but it was tricky. The parts from the Dapol kit also got messed up a bit, as they came with bad casting errors. I ended up with fittings on the end of my louvers that I didn't want. I wanted fittings like pegs and ridges at the back, but not at the front and not in the middle, as they would interfere with fitting against the roof strut there. So I smoothed off the fitting ridges and pegs that I didn't want. I fitted the louvers butting up against the front and back walls, with the pegs and ridges connecting at the back and resting against the side of the roof truss in the middle. It was a devil of a job to get them to go on straight and connected at all 3 points. They have to go on the right way up also, of course, with the beveled edges at the top. Now I sorted out my roof pieces and tried to figure out how they would go on. 2 pieces for each side and 2 ridge pieces. I've already glued the 2 ridge pieces together here. I went ahead and glued 2 pieces together for each side. Further problems arose later with these that I didn't quite understand at this point. Now I wanted to do some spray painting before assembling things further. I masked some parts of the main assembly to protect them as I sprayed a brick colour on the outside. These are the main doors. I've just glued a small inset door piece into the main door on the left. These parts are for the small lean-to on the back of the engine shed. This is optional but may help to get a longer engine into the shed. If this is not used, then double human-sized doors can be fitted to the back of the shed. I glued the walls of the lean-to together, but I didn't glue the door and the roof in place at this point as I wanted to paint them different colours. Here's everything back from spray painting. Brick red on the main structure, green for the windows and doors, grey for the roof parts, and brown for the lean-to and the notice board. I spray painted with petroleum-based paints. Then I applied washes with alcohol and water-based paints. Here I am applying a light grey alcohol wash to the brickwork. Rather a messy job with such a large assembly. I got stuff all over my hands, and I've got paper down on the cutting mat to protect it a bit. I applied a black wash to the roof parts. I hand-painted the small parts for the lamps, the fan, the downpipes, and the spikes on the roof with gunmetal and silver. I took the masking tape off the louvers and the roof truss. Then I hand-painted the louvers black. Here are all of the green painted parts. I only sprayed them on one side except for the main doors, which needed to be sprayed on both sides as both sides would be seen. Unfortunately, I then had to spend some time scraping paint off the parts that I'd just painted, as polycement won't stick plastic parts properly if the surfaces are protected by paint, so I scraped all around the fitting edges of the window parts. Overspray had got onto the insides of the walls also, so I scraped around the edges of the window openings in the inside of the walls. Then I glued all of the windows in place. They fit into the openings from the inside, and the fit was generally good. I glued the fan part to its motor backing. This assembly then fitted into the hole above the main doors, with the back of the motor piece held between the 4 supporting legs. Since the roof parts were going to butt up against the back wall, the tops of the wall parts would be visible, so I painted them black. I tried to glue the side roof parts in place, but there were some problems. The roof parts are designed to fit butted up to the back wall and to go over the front wall and overlap forward. But since we've doubled the walls and the roofs, we've also doubled the overlap. That isn't necessarily a major problem in itself. If you wanted to reduce the overlap, you'd need to just cut down the end of the roof sections. But even if you don't mind the extra overlap, the roof parts won't fit, as they have ridges on the bottom that go almost their whole length. Those ridges are going to stop the roof parts sitting down properly on the front wall. They also interfere with the fitting down on the roof truss in the middle. The Airfix instructions say that the 2 roof sections will meet at the truss for a double-length shed, but they won't if you put the truss in the middle, as the back roof section was designed to overlap the front wall, and so it will overlap the truss. The bottom line is that some of the ridges need to be removed from the roof parts to get them to fit properly for a double-length shed. You could also reduce the overall length of the roof sections as an alternative way of getting them to fit. I left the roof sections their original length but cut off part of the ribbing. I felt that this resulted in a fairly reasonable assembly, as I didn't mind the extra overlap at the front. Similar considerations apply to the roof ridge parts. The ribs will stop the parts fitting over the truss and the front wall, so it's necessary to cut away part of the ribbing to get the parts to fit. I cut off the ribs with a knife, carefully, as I didn't want the knife to slip and cut me. I've had that happen in the past. And then I sanded down a bit. Even with the ribs cut off, I had trouble getting the roof parts to stay stuck down at the front, perhaps due to warping of the parts, so I resorted to adding extra glue and clamping. I glued the door into the wall of the lean-to. Then I glued a lamp over the door and also picked out the door handle in gold. Here's that assembly seam from the top with its roof beside it. The roof glues on, located by ribs which actually fit in this case, and helped hold the walls square. I finished off the painting of the downpipes after detaching them from the sprue. I went with 4 downpipes, so I used both the Airfix and the Dapol parts. 2 come with each kit. There are little spikes that go on the roof ridge, presumably for lightning protection. They fit into holes, and they wouldn't actually go into the holes, so I measured the spike parts with my calipers and then used an appropriately sized drill bit in a pin vise to open up the holes. With the holes opened up, I fitted the spikes in place. I used all 4 spikes from both kits, although this did result in 2 spikes close together in the middle. Here's the top of the back wall, a bit messy, and unpainted plastic is showing at the back of the roof ridge part. Also, the side part of the right roof is not fitted down properly. I painted the back of the ridge part black, as I couldn't get it to go down any further as it was sitting on the ribs of the back wall. I also managed to get the right side roof to sit down better. Actually, the back of the shed won't generally be seen when it's on the layout. I attached the lean-to over the opening in the back wall. The main doors hang on hinges, so they can be closed and opened and posed at whatever angle after fitting. I glued a lamp over the front door. I used all of the lamps from the Airfix kit and some from the Dapol kit. I glued the downpipes in place. There aren't any particular places for them, they just glue against a flat wall. The Airfix instructions did suggest gluing downpipes in the middle to hide the join in the wall, but I didn't really think that was necessary. Here's the other side after the fitting of the downpipes, and of course you can see the door of the lean-to from this side. There are fittings on the side wall for a notice board with a lamp over it. For a single shed there would just be a notice board on one side, but when you make a double-length shed you end up with notice board fittings on both sides, so I thought I might as well fit notice boards with lamps on both sides. So I painted another lamp from the Dapol kit, and I also painted the notice board from the Dapol kit. And I fitted those on the other side of the shed. They came towards the back because of the way the side walls went together, at least the way I did them. I figured that I might as well put some notices on the notice boards. Nothing of that sort came with either kit, so I found some LMS notices online and printed something up on my PC. Here are my printed notices cut out. They're pretty small. Those are 1 centimeter squares on the cutting mat. I glued the notices to the boards using rocket glue. Here's one notice board completed. And here's the other. I placed the shed on my main Hornby layout. It was a bit tricky getting it to fit. I moved the Metcalf single road shed over to the next track, which was a bit curved, so that I could put the Airfix Dapol shed on the longer, straighter track. It was a tight fit against the platform and the footbridge at the back. I also removed a bit of track bed at the end of the track to get the back of the shed to sit down properly. Here you can see the doors of the Airfix and Dapol shed and the Metcalf shed. I had taken the locos off these two lines whilst working on fitting the sheds. Now I tried to get the locos back in. On the turntable is LMS Princess class Princess Victoria in the latest Hornby tooling. I backed the Princess into the shed. It didn't quite fit. I put the Hornby 4F back into the Metcalf shed. So there's the shed after my initial fitting with the Princess inside. Should I have glazed the windows? I didn't, and they look pretty much right like that to me. When I slept on this, I figured that it might make more sense to remove the buffer that was still mounted to the end of the track inside the shed. You couldn't really see it, and it wasn't necessary to stop the loco going off the track, as the back wall of the shed would do that. So I pulled the loco out of the shed and lifted the shed. Here's the line for the inside of the shed with its track bed and buffer. You can see at the end where I've cut away the track bed beyond the end of the track. I refitted the shed with the buffer removed. This allowed the Princess to fit further into the shed, although it's a big loco and the front still protruded a bit. Things are very tight at the back, with the lean-to almost touching the platform and rather obstructing the stairs from the footbridge, which actually got moved a bit as part of this process. It's all a little cramped, but I think I can live with it, especially given that this angle will be rarely seen. So there we are, another kit completed and added to the layout. This may well be the last kit to go on this Hornby layout. I never like to say that for sure, but I don't have any plans for placing any more kits on this layout at the moment.